Good evening and welcome to Colorado Decides, a joint production of PBS 12, CBS 4, and the Colorado Sun. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for joining us. Joining me is political analyst and columnist for Colorado Politics, Eric Sondermann.
Good to be here, Dominic.
Well, tonight our debate series takes a look at one of the more important candidate races on November's ballot. George Brauchler, the current district attorney in the 18th Judicial District, is term limited. And tonight we bring you the candidates running to become the next district attorney in this influential judicial district. The 18th Judicial District encompasses Arapahoe, Douglas, Lincoln, and Elbert counties. It includes 1.1 million people. Approximately 20% of the population of Colorado is represented in this district. Joining us for the next 30 minutes are Amy Padden, the Democratic candidate.
Thank you so much for hosting this.
Great to see you here, Amy. And John Kellner, the Republican candidate.
Thanks for having me on, Dominic.
It's great to have you both here. Thank you so much. As you can see, we have folks joining us remotely. We have limited times. Let's get started. Eric, why don't we throw it to you for your first question?
Thank you, Dominic, and thanks, Amy and John. I'll ask this question of both of you. We'll start with Amy, but we'll rotate the order as we go along through the half hour. Can you just talk to us about how you see this job? Is it primarily a management job of running a very big operation? Is it an advocacy job? Is it a prosecutorial job of being in the courtroom? Give us each your perspective and your approach. Amy first.
Sure, absolutely. I see it primarily as a management job. I mean, this is the biggest judicial district in the state. And so it's critically important with someone with proven management skills running an office like this. So when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I was the third in command for the last year that I worked at that office. And there I managed a budget of $14 million just for operations that excluded payroll. I also supervised the day-to-day operations of prosecutors in 3 offices around the state. And to me, I think that is the leading role that the DA should be playing. They should be managing the office, but also interacting with the community, listening to the community, having town halls, which DAs often don't do. And we've done 8 of those during this campaign so far. And that's what I see the role of the next district attorney for the 18th Judicial District.
And to you, John?
You know, I think it's really all of the above, all of those things you talked about. But primarily, this job is about judgment. It's about making difficult decisions, I think, in some of the most important and difficult cases in our community. And it takes experience to make those right calls. And it's really about who you trust to make those decisions. And I think it's impossible to make those judgment calls if you've never stood before a jury with a murder victim's widow sitting behind you in the gallery as you present that case. Because elected DAs are not simply, I think, administrators or managers. In major cities all across our state, DAs personally prosecute some of the most important cases for their communities because they're the most accountable people in that office. When I worked for Stan Garnett, a Democrat in Boulder, as a district attorney, I saw Stan personally prosecute murder trials. I've seen Michael Dougherty, the DA in Boulder, do the same, along with George Brauchler and Dan May. So it's all of those things. It's about setting the tone about what your priorities are as a district attorney, and it's about being accountable to the people. And when I say setting the tone, I'm talking about explaining to the other prosecutors in your office what you expect them to do and how you expect them to do it. I had the experience to get that job done.
Well, I want to get into some of the details and frankly inform our viewers, because it was informative to me to realize how big this district is and how many people are included. When you think about the entire city of Aurora, that's a big part of it. Pardon me, not the entire city, because Adams County is included. That's a different district, and that's a part of this. You're looking at Douglas County. You're looking at Arapahoe County. In each of those areas, we've seen a lot of big issues come up. Let's tackle something that's going on in Aurora. We just saw charges come down for some of the protesters that were not just protesting, but actually these were individuals that the charges said committed other crimes. So this was not just tackling the protesters, but these particular individuals that were committing crimes. Let's just start very simply, and John, we'll start with you. Did you agree with the charges filed, at least from the 18th Judicial District, on behalf of George Brauchler?
Of course, I agree with the charges that were filed. There's evidence that supports them. Probable cause was found by a judge, and now the justice system will determine whether or not we, as prosecutors, can prove those charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And of course, as you understand, I am a current Chief Deputy DA in the office, so I'm not going to talk about the specifics of those cases. That would be inappropriate and unethical for me to do that. But what I can say, and everybody on this listening to this should know, the folks that are charged with those alleged crimes, those are just allegations. They are presumed innocent. And now we have the process to determine whether or not we, as prosecutors, can meet our burden of proving their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
Amy, if elected, you'll be in a position to follow through with these charges. Do you agree with what's happened so far?
Yeah, well, because of that reason and the fact that I don't have access to the file, I don't think it'd be appropriate, responsible to comment on that, because I would inherit those cases if I were to be elected. But I will say this, I've been hearing a lot from people in the community, and people in the community are concerned. I mean, everyone has a First Amendment right to peacefully protest. But on the other hand, we need to be sure that people aren't looting and engaging in destruction of property. But we need to strike a balance between these two things. And folks in the community don't think the right balance has been struck. And if they don't think the right balance has been struck, they should vote for a change, because it's completely within the district attorney's discretion about which cases to bring, which charges to file, as long as the DA believes that they can ethically prove those cases beyond a reasonable doubt. And so that's prosecutorial discretion. And if the folks don't like the way that George Brauchler has been exercising his discretion, they should vote for a different district attorney.
Eric, let's go to you next for your next question.
Sure. Let me go to another hot button issue. It's a little bit past tense, but I think it'd give us an idea of where both of you are coming from. John, maybe we'll go with you first on this one. Let's talk about the death penalty, which is, and two specific questions. One, did you support its repeal in the recent legislative session and then signed by Governor Polis? And secondly, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, all of the inmates residing before the repeal on death row in Colorado came out of the 18th Judicial District. All, I believe, were also African American. And is that appropriate? To you first, John.
Sure. So the governor did commute the sentences for the Chuck E. Cheese mass killer. The governor also commuted the sentence to life without the possibility of parole for people who killed witnesses to another murder case. Now, whether or not I think it's appropriate, this is not John Kellner's law. The legislature makes those decisions about whether or not the death penalty will be something that we have as an option for prosecutors in this state. I have personally prosecuted a capital case. I've seen some of the terrible things that happen in our community, and I do think that there are cases that are quantitatively different. You know, cases where we deal with, frankly, dozens of murder cases every single year in this jurisdiction, but there are cases where people murder witnesses, where children have been killed, innocent children, where mass murders occurred. Of course, this is a jurisdiction that saw the horrible Aurora movie theater massacre. And so that was an important tool for prosecutors to have in basically dealing with cases and presenting them to the jury and for our community to make a resolution, and no longer is an option.
And Amy, to you, and I would just throw the other wrinkle in, and John referenced it, given that the death penalty is no longer an option, it's no longer in your prosecutorial arsenal, does that make it more difficult to get pleas?
Yeah, so first of all, I openly supported the repeal of the death penalty. I don't think the death penalty is an effective deterrent. It's extraordinarily expensive. It takes tolls on witnesses and victims and jurors. And so I supported its repeal. And I was also against using the death penalty as leverage to get a life sentence as a plea. And I think we are prepared to take those cases to trial. It's important to take those cases to trial. We had death penalty cases that were prosecuted in the U.S. Attorney's Office when I was there. And, you know, that it still exists under federal law, but I supported its repeal under state law. And I don't think it's necessary as a tool to get a life sentence.
Let's get into another controversial law that really impacts and really came from events that happened in your judicial district that you're both running to represent as district attorney, and that is red flag laws, whereas Sheriff Tony Spurlock in Douglas County was a key supporter of the red flag law that was passed by the legislature. It is law in Colorado, but different sheriffs in different counties throughout Colorado have stances that they would not enforce it. In the 18th Judicial District, with either of you as district attorney, what would be your stance on the red flag law? Amy, it's your turn to start.
Absolutely. So the red flag law, I think, is an important tool, and that law needs to be enforced. It's critically important. I've lost, friends to suicide from guns. I've lost someone I care about to gun violence, and it's really important that we be able to use tools like that to take guns out of the hands of dangerous individuals. These are individuals that have been identified by friends or families as being a danger to themselves or others. And it's critically important that we enforce those laws. On the other hand, I respect Second Amendment rights. My husband's a hunter. He owns guns. And the Second Amendment is an important part of our culture, particularly here in the 18th Judicial District.
John, same question. What's the stance on the red flag law with John Kellner's DA in the 18th?
I absolutely support Second Amendment rights as well. I think that's a critical thing to put out there. When it comes to red flag, you mentioned Sheriff Tony Spurlock, the sheriff from Douglas County. Sheriff Spurlock has endorsed me to be the next district attorney for this district because he knows that I will faithfully uphold the law and apply it equally to anyone. Now, the red flag law, I think, addressed an important gap in some of the things that we had in terms of tools to help ensure that guns don't get in the hands of dangerous people. Fortunately, it's being applied judiciously, it's being reviewed judiciously, and it's not being overused in a way, I think, that infringes on people's rights, and that is critically important for people to understand.
Eric, let's go to our next question.
Sure. Thank you. Let's talk about police misconduct and when those allegations arise and whether there isn't almost an inherent conflict with a district attorney investigating a police department in his or her jurisdiction, given that any district attorney, any prosecutor relies so heavily on the cooperation of a police department to bring cases. So I guess we'll go to John first on this one, but when police misconduct allegations arise, let's say in the Aurora Police Department, but it could be anywhere in this district, how do you approach those investigations? How do you assure the public that they are fair and thorough and unbiased?
That's a great question, Eric. So in our jurisdiction, when there is an allegation of an unlawful use of deadly force, we investigate that thoroughly and impartially. So if that were to happen, for instance, in the Aurora Police Department, the Aurora Police Department would not be the lead agency investigating itself. We take a look from a different agency reviewing that case, and then we decide whether or not charges are appropriate. We then publish that information and make it available on our website so that everybody can see exactly why we came to those decisions. And this is important because public trust and accountability doesn't hinge on whether you wear a badge or not. If you wear a badge, you should be equally accountable under the law. And in this administration, we have prosecuted over 35 law enforcement officers, sheriffs, for instance, Republican sheriffs, for allegations of violations of the law. And that's important so that people know that it doesn't matter what job you hold, that here in the 18th, we will hold people accountable when it is appropriate.
And Amy, your response, please.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Eric, about the concern about conflicts. And there is a process in the 18th, the CRT, to have so that that specific agency isn't investigating those cases. But I've actually advocated to take things one step further. I think it would be ideal if the legislature would create a special unit within the Colorado Attorney General's office to investigate these cases for several reasons. First of all, we avoid this issue of conflict. And to be honest, the public is not really aware of how these cases are investigated and prosecuted in some cases. And then, they would also have individuals who specialize in these types of cases at the Attorney General's office, as well as that would provide a uniform standard around the state. Because as you know, we have 22 and soon to be 23 judicial districts around the state. And if we had a uniform standard that was being applied throughout the state, I think that would really help restore the trust between law enforcement and communities, because right now there's a real lack of trust between law enforcement and communities, particularly in the 18th Judicial District and particularly in Aurora, where I live. And we need to work hard to restore that trust.
I'd like to respond to that if I can.
Please.
So I strongly disagree with this concept of creating a specialized unit within the Attorney General's office to review allegations of use of force or deadly force. The reality is that the unit and the experience that Ms. Padden talks about does not exist. The folks there don't have that experience or expertise to review these kinds of cases. And what you're doing is you're taking decision making farther away from the most accountable elected official who can then answer for their decision. Now, let's say that you create something like this, and folks in Alamosa have a situation where there is an officer-involved shooting, and the Attorney General there decides to prosecute that. The folks in Alamosa barely can make a dent in a statewide race to make their voices be heard, whether they agree with that decision or not. So I think it's incumbent upon the person who's most accountable, the local elected district attorney, to make those decisions. Now, what I do favor is expanding our current critical review team, incident response team, to things that are not just officer-involved shootings where deadly force is used. I think that needs to be expanded to things involving serious bodily injury and other cases like that.
Amy, I think only fair to give you a chance to respond to the response.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. The problem with that is our DAs serve 4-year terms, and the second term, they are lame ducks. And so, we've seen time and time again, for example, in George Floyd's case, we saw the local prosecutor there press charges and only charge one of the 4 officers. And then the state attorney general stepped in and upgraded that one charge and charged the other 3 officers. We've seen that in Elijah McClain, where Governor Polis appointed Phil Weiser to be a special prosecutor in that case. And the district attorney that was in the 17th Judicial District, but Dave Young is term limited. So, I don't agree that would be the appropriate way to do it. I think having this centralized office with uniform standards would really be the best way to ensure that accountability that the public's been demanding.
Good exchange. Back to you, Dominic.
Thank you, Eric. It was a good exchange. I want to talk more about the diversity of this district. I think not only does it include 1.1 million people, which is pretty staggering. I think just under 5 million people live in the state of Colorado completely. But you go from a growing, huge city of Aurora as a big part of this district, but you also include in suburbs like Highlands Ranch and Littleton. And then you have to include all the different ranches and ranchers that are going to be part of Elbert and Lincoln County. That's a lot of different situations, and I want to know what each of our candidates feel about what are the important ways to be able to address everything from the needs of a sheriff's department in the middle of Lincoln County all the way to police conduct in Aurora to what's going on with schools in the middle of Highlands Ranch. That's a lot to cover. John, I think it's your turn to start a question. How does that work in if you are elected?
That's a great question, because we do have about 1.1 million people in this jurisdiction. It's the most populated jurisdiction in the entire state of Colorado. And I've been working here for the last 8 years serving this community. I ran our largest felony prosecution team in Arapahoe County for several years. I ran our cold case homicide unit, and now I'm the chief deputy DA in charge of all of Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln County prosecutions. And what that's enabled me to do is build relationships with law enforcement and the local communities all across our 4 counties, because the issues that face them are different. As you mentioned, we've got more urban areas in Aurora, we've got more rural areas in Elbert and Lincoln counties, we've got great, enormous suburbs in Highlands Ranch and Castle Rock and other places, and the issues with crime vary from place to place. I have the relationships and experience to deal with that. That's why I've been endorsed by sheriffs from all 4 counties, current and former sheriffs, along with law enforcement entities that I've worked with to solve and prosecute cold cases and other serious important cases across our district for these last 8 years.
Amy, if elected, how do you cover the diversity of all different kinds, frankly, in the 18th Judicial District?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one of the amazing things about Aurora, where I live, is the diversity that we have here, the diversity of the immigrant community. And, a lot of these decisions are going to have to be made with respect to local control about, what does the local community think about the role of SROs in their schools? And that's going to be different for different communities. That's different in Aurora, where I live and where my stepdaughter is a public school teacher, than it is in Highlands Ranch, or than it will be in Lincoln County or Elbert County. And so it's going to be really important to partner with local elected officials. I've been endorsed by the majority of the Aurora public school boards. I've been endorsed by state legislators and state senators throughout the district, as well as city council people. And it's really going to take a lot of work to make sure that we are being responsive to the needs of the local communities. But I've worked in many different communities. I worked in rural areas. I worked in urban areas. When I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, we covered the entire state. When I was in special prosecutions at the Attorney General's office, I worked in rural Colorado, down south in Huerfano and Los Animas and Alamosa counties, helping them with felony prosecutions down there. And so I understand what it's like to work for different areas with very different and competing needs. And I am up to the task for sure to address those needs and work closely with local elected officials.
We are just a couple minutes away from closing statements, so I'll ask our candidates to offer shorter answers. For Eric, let's go ahead and get a last question or so from you.
Sure. Sorry about that, John, but let's keep rolling here. We've talked much about violent crime. Let me shift it real quickly, and we do need crisp answers here. Talk about white-collar crime, where that fits into your priority scheme, how you approach that, and what your experience is in prosecuting white-collar crime. Amy, I think you're up first here.
Great. Yes, that's an important priority, and I do have experience in doing that, both when I was at the Colorado Attorney General's office. I was a consumer protection prosecutor, which involved white-collar crime cases, and I focused on charity fraud. And those cases are critically important because we had individuals out there bilking our seniors out of money and out of donations. When I was in the 5th Judicial District, I worked on a major white-collar case where there were hundreds of thousands of dollars at issue that had been stolen from a metro district. I worked up that case. I hired the experts. We were preparing for trial. And the defense attorney called and said his client was going to plead straight up to the top charge with open sentencing. And I went to the sentencing hearing and we asked the judge for a DOC time, and we got 7 years of DOC time. So this is a really important priority.
And John?
Yeah, I have also dealt with white-collar crime cases throughout my career. We have a very robust economic crimes unit in our jurisdiction. They do a fantastic job, but I think it's important to focus in on some things that Ms. Padden just said about her supposed experience as a prosecutor. And the reality is this: I cannot find a single case where she has successfully tried a felony in a trial or a violent crime in a state court trial anywhere. Now, if anybody were to Google me and look me up, they would find a plethora of high-profile homicide cases and cases that I've worked on. And this matters, Eric, because we are making decisions as district attorneys and using our earned judgment that we've learned in the courtroom to make these decisions that impact the public safety of our community. And Ms. Padden, though she says she's an experienced prosecutor, simply does not have that.
Well, and Amy, you're going to get a chance to respond because it is time for a closing statement. So in this case, you're actually going to get the very last word because we offer each of our representatives, our candidates, 30 seconds. A coin flip before the program determined that John would go first. So, John, please offer your 30-second closing statement.
Sure. My name is John Kellner. I'm asking for your vote for District Attorney of the 18th Judicial District. I've been serving this state as a prosecutor since I left active duty in the Marine Corps 10 years ago. And unlike my opponent, who talked about living in Aurora, she moved into the district just weeks before announcing her campaign. I have lived here for the last 8 years. My wife grew up in Arapahoe County, and we've returned here to raise our kids who both go to public schools. I'm running for this job because I want to serve the community my family calls home. And I have ideas to improve our office and make lasting changes that will serve all the members of our community. To me, this job is about service and doing the right thing regardless of politics. I will not use the DA's office as a political stepping stone. Safety, fairness, and justice is what guides me, not politics. I'd be honored to have your vote for District Attorney. You can learn more at johnkellner.com. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Amy, we now go to you for your 30-second closing statement.
Well, thank you so much again for having us. I've been an attorney for twice as long as Mr. Kellner has been, and I've worked at all 3 levels of government as a prosecutor. I've worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office, serving as the third in command, managing the Office of Prosecutors. I worked at the Colorado Attorney General's Office on 2 different occasions as a prosecutor. The second time, worked on homicides and violent crimes. I worked in 2 different district attorney's office, and I bring all that experience to the table. And before that career, I was a partner at a law firm during the time that Mr. Kellner was still in law school. So I bring a wealth of experience to the table. I bring leadership skills. I bring new, fresh ideas because it's time for change in the 18th Judicial District. I would be honored to earn your vote, and please vote by November 3rd.
Well, that is all the time we have for our debate featuring the candidates running to become the district attorney in the 18th Judicial District. I'd like to thank our candidates, Amy Padden and John Kellner. I'd also like to thank my fellow panelist, Eric Sondermann, as always. If you would like to find out more information about this or any of the other general election issues or races, please visit our websites at pbs12.org, cbsdenver.com, and, of course, coloradosun.com. Be sure you can you can see at those websites all of the various debates we've covered this season. Every ballot issue you can possibly think of, we have covered. We have 2 more coming next week, so be sure to tune in. We'll be covering not only the you have to be a citizen to vote, but we'll also be doing a full ballot review with a special panel, so we're excited to do that. Again, that is going to be next Friday at 7 and 7:30. For everybody here at PBS 12 and for Colorado Sides, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.